Hey, I'm Julie Tucker.
Hey, I'm Emmanuel Scott.
And my name is Zach Gilliland. This is our group data case study for this EFD 620 measurement class. So when we go to this next slide, Ms. Tucker is going to present you with a scenario of sort of what this case study is about.
Yes, so we are teacher leaders for this case study, and we are going to help a teacher, Miss Esperanza. She is a ninth grade algebra teacher. She has just given her end of a unit assessment. And as teacher leaders, we are going to help her to analyze her assessment data and come up with an action plan to help her and her students be successful.
So this is just a screenshot of the data that we had to work with as it related to this algebra test that Miss Esperanza administered to her class. So we took this and sort of started looking at things that jumped out at us and sort of followed the prompts for this case study. And we included this just for your viewing that this is what we used as we were breaking down what happened on this algebra exam. So step one, this kind of asks us, what parts of this data catches our attention. And I've kind of pulled a zoomed in screenshot here of some of the data. The short answer and open-ended questions, which are in the third and fourth columns there. You see that there's such a large number of students who didn't master those. The red coded percentages are failures. And then the yellow or above failure, but kind of below mastery, so to speak. So 50% of the testers scored less than mastery on the short answer questions, and then 78% of them scored less than mastery on open-ended questions. So those are the things that kind of jumped out at me initially, as far as what caught your attention when you initially view this data. Ms. Tucker, do you have anything here that you would like to add?
Yeah, it just really jumped out at me, the standard mastery, looking at it, not so much based on short answer or question style, but just on basic standard mastery. 45% of the students scored below proficiency. So, that's almost half of the class not meeting that proficiency on standards. And so, and then it also just jumped out to me that there was a standard on linear equations, but yet it was not a part of the testing process. And so there was no data for students in mastery of linear equations. It looked, and when you looked at the data, you also saw 29% of the students scored less than 60% on all three styles of questions. So that came out to be about 4 kids that across the board did not do well on this at all on any type of question, whether it was multiple choice, open-ended, short answer. So it just, really eyeballed to me that those 4 students really need some targeted assistance.
All right, so when we look at step 2, what is the data actually telling us? That based on the screenshot that we showed you earlier, the exam's broken down by question type, question topic, and it gives you percentages of each question that are correct or whatever. So it basically tells you what answer choice they put down, who all got it right, who all missed it. So, I mean, there is a very comprehensive breakdown of what's going on here. 71% of the kids answered multiple choice questions correctly, which granted, I think that's fairly typical to perform a little bit higher on multiple choice than it would be short answer or open-ended. But there was, as far as the multiple choice questions, everything seems to be fine there. And then when you jump down to short answer, 56% of those were answered correctly. So there's, that's starting to raise some eyebrows about, do we fully grasp what's going on here as far as the objectives that are being taught? And then when you get to open-ended, 37% were answered correctly. So as you work through the test and questions go from multiple choice, short answer to open-ended, they're getting more difficult on these students, and we got to figure out, or try to figure out, what's the disconnect here. Overall, generally speaking, the average test score for this entire class was 57%. So that's not where we want that to be. Going to the next slide here, you've got the actual standards that are broken down. So this test covered 3 standards. 2 of those are part of linear expressions and systems of equations that are going to be most problematic for these students. But with mean, median, mode, and the pre-algebra standards on the top left there's no major problems other than percentages. The students didn't do well on percentages. And then when you get into the right-hand side of their Algebra 1, number 1 standard, look at linear equations where it says they solved them. The questions 5 and 19, just solving equations. 89% of the students performed well there. What about writing them? Writing expressions, 75% did fine. But when you go to graphing or combining the writing and the solving of linear equations, the students didn't do well. So it's almost like they can do one step of this, but then when you start trying to compile things on top of them, they can't handle that. So that makes me wonder if they really fully have concept mastery here. And the same goes for the bottom left-hand side. It's a little worse down there on the Algebra 1, number 2 standards. When you've got systems of equations, they did okay with graphing them, but they didn't do well with solving them or combining writing and solving. Just like when we go back to linear equations, they didn't write and solve linear equations or systems of equations well at all. One positive note that I think will be discussed a little bit later is the functions. Identifying functions, 100% of the students did well on that question. That was question number 7 on the exam. So basically, that's what the data shows us. What do we not know? We don't really know why there's a disconnect. What is it that's, we don't really have the explanation why they solving an equation or writing an equation, but why they can't write and solve an equation. So we've got to figure out that in that regard. That's what we don't know from this data, and we just don't have an explanation for that. So we got to dig back into this and figure out why. And when this is retaught or whatever, hopefully we can fix this issue. All right, so this is step 3 here. What good news is there to celebrate? And that'll be Ms. Tucker. Ms. Tucker's going to talk about that to you.
Yes, and absolutely. Anytime that, as a teacher leader, you definitely want to make sure that you highlight and celebrate the achievements, and you find the good, when working with teachers and each other and collaborating, even though, as we have kind of looked and talked about already, there are some problems and there are some things to address, but it's very important that you do find the good, even if there is some bad. And there is definitely some good news to celebrate with Miss Esperanza's data. There are 100% of the students mastered identifying functions, and that's a really big deal. 100%, meaning every kid, they're good on that. They understand that, and they are able to use that as a foundation and a stepping stone for the standards that build upon each other. 89% of the students mastered solving linear equations, and that was through the multiple choice questions. And so as they move to the short answer questions, you can look at that, celebrate that, but then identify the ones that actually had struggled when it became to the short answer questions, and just see, looking at their work, being able to identify where did they miss a step. But it's definitely important to celebrate that definitely well over half of the class mastered the solving of linear equations. And also the class scored above proficiency on most of the pre-algebra standards as a whole. All of those there. The only exception was the percents that they need to do extra work on. But if you looked at the standard 1, 2, 3 as a whole, the class really did well on all of the pre-algebra standards. So those are the points where it's important to celebrate with Miss Esperanza, and to encourage her and to to be able to show that, you know, that there are successes in her class and her teaching and what she is doing for the students.
All right, so now we're going to shift to Mr. Scott. He's going to talk about the, you know, what are the issues of practice here that this data suggests to us. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, sir. So what are the problems of practice? What issues could have been raised about classroom practices? Going back, thinking about taking it back to the basics, it's like, is the teacher relaying the information correctly to the students? Is she reflecting? Like, what I'm saying is she providing them information, and then she's checking like checkpoints to see if the students are understanding what she's relaying to them, and if not, is she going back and reflecting on her practices? Do she need to change it up? Because, you know, each student learns differently. So because each student learns differently, I feel like during her practices with the past results, she probably needs to take a step back. There's nothing wrong with self-reflecting, understanding what went well, and also what can be improved on so that her test scores can be improved on the next lesson. What is the first step to increase student success in this area? I would recommend figuring out where the student stands. I call it a pre-test. It's just like a little 5 or 6 questions based off the information you're going to provide in the upcoming lesson. You got to figure out what they know. Because if you have some students that know the information, but you're going about it, teaching them the same lesson again, they're going to get bored and lose interest. So they may know the information on how to solve the problems, but because they've lost their interest, they're not going to be able to perform their best because they feel like they're just repeating something that they already know. Also, with the stuff that they don't know, that allows her to gain information on, okay, this is what they know. I should not put much of my time on this part, but let's go back and put more info parts that they did not know. So there were a lot of time to understanding what the first step she needs to do to help increase her student success. Where do you suggest we go from here? I say I would recommend, based off the scores, that this lesson be reconstructed to help increase score rates. I understand she had a lot of successes with her lesson and how the outcome came, but reaching out to some of her peers, like especially when they have the grade level meetings, just to ask, so if you taught this lesson, how did you guys do it? Because everyone teaches differently and everyone can learn from everybody within the same school, or reach out to a colleague who teaches the same subject at a different school. There's nothing wrong with collaborating with someone outside of your current location. What are the next steps this teacher should take? Like I said, ask probing questions to the students. There's nothing wrong with stopping during each lesson, asking someone, do they understand? See if there's someone who's not paying attention. Ask peers, try to do like a peer assessment, get them in small groups, have them do math equations together, see which table or which group is performing the best, switch it up. So the ones that's doing well, put them group with someone who's not doing as well as them, so they can combine and help each other grow. And then also the last step is there other data or material we should look into? Technology. Nowadays, a lot of students are always on tablets, laptops, and everything. Look into that, and then they allow them to fluently go throughout the lessons, because at home they're thinking they're having fun, but they're actually doing work and learning without actually sitting in the classroom.
All right, thank you, Mr. Scott. So basically, what conclusions can be drawn from what we've seen here? You know, several students don't have concept mastery of writing, solving, and graphing linear equations. So they can do one part, but they can't do all of that together. So that's what, you know, kind of jumps out at you. But you know, that's something that we got to figure out, and we'll do that together as a team. So, you know, are there other recommendations that you guys have, Ms. Tucker, Mr. Scott, going forward with this?
Yeah, I do think that, you know, a twofold action plan is important. And the data analysis, you know, just the fact that we are looking at that end of unit assessment and we are figuring out what the problems are, so that instead of just filing it away, giving a grade, and moving on, which is what cannot happen. We are using the data to then guide our instruction, looking at our tests, making sure they are valid, making sure that it is, fair and balanced, and allowing, our students to really use their different level of knowledge, on being open-ended, multiple choice, everything. So, and then making sure that we're using that data to reteach to our kids. Like we mentioned earlier, there's 4 kids sitting in that classroom that had zero mastery of anything. And so making sure that we are identifying those students, and making sure that we are getting the necessary help for them. And then after we have retaught the material, then retesting and seeing mastery, not just filing it away and moving on, and that's the grade you get, because that does not help our students to reach their potential.
All right. Mr. Scott, what do you
Agreed,
think?
agreed. I understand. I agree with her as well. And then the second part of the action plan, I would say changing instructional practices. Teacher collaboration, like I previously stated, there's nothing wrong with sharing best practices with your colleagues. I know we all feel that I set up Sunday night to make this lesson go this way. It should work. I'm gonna kind of force it to work. No, sometimes you can take a step back and collaborate with your colleagues and see, hey, what's the best way to do this? How did you do it? Just ask questions. I know we feel like we all are the teachers, that our way is always kind of the best way, but no, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to others for help. Formative assessment. In this data, I think that she should have like more than one formative assessment, because based off the assignment and the information provided that she gave to the students, I just feel like should have, and then took back and retaught what was failed for her second formative assessment.
Right.
And again, last, like differentiate groups for instruction. Like I said, break it down. Have different stations. Pair students with the students who are doing better than them or who not understand as much as them. Just combine it to make it equal for those, especially those students who are scoring 0. I know there's this one peer in their class that can help them improve their test scores other than just listening to the teacher to try to grasp the information.
All right. Well, I think you both brought out all kinds of good points regarding this. If anybody doesn't have any questions going forward, this pretty well wraps up our case study analysis on Miss Esperanza's algebra test.